Well, hello. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for joining us this morning. And thank you to my friends at BDO Israel for taking the time to share insights into Israel for us. This all started with the Abraham Accords last year, but BDO as a global organization, we've had long, strong relationships for many, many years. So from that, you can be assured of a seamless cooperation and service between our countries and between our firms and benefit from that. The truth is, business has started now between our countries. Up to now, there's been $675 million worth of deals that have been transacted. And we need to take advantage of that. We need to look at these opportunities. They're saying that by 2024, there'll be $4 billion worth of trade between the two countries. We need to understand where those opportunities are. So we've got a great lineup of people to share those insights with you today. And I'd like to introduce you to Shen Herzog from BDO Israel to share with us where those opportunities are within the Israeli economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald, and good morning. I would like to share with you our overview of the Israeli economy, the Israeli market, and the opportunities within this market, doing business in Israel in 2022. And just to give you a snapshot of the Israeli economy, we are a relatively geographically small economy, $400 billion GDP with a GDP per capita of $44,000, a population, relatively small population of about 9 million people. And I think when you compare Israel to other OECD countries in terms of GDP per capita, you can see that Israel is diminishing the gap versus OECD countries and actually very close to the average standard of living or GDP per capita in OECD countries. And one of the unique characteristics of the Israeli economy is our population growth rate. And Israel has one of the highest demographic organic growth rates among OECD countries. And this growth rate really has very significant economic implications, especially when you were talking about the infrastructure segments, because it really means that just to stay in the same place, we need to keep investing in a pace of 2% per year in all our infrastructures, being it energy infrastructure, transportation, housing, you name it. We need more and more of everything, and this creates enormous growth and investment opportunity across all sectors. So I like to begin with showing you Israel's post-COVID. It's difficult to talk about post-COVID because we're still in the midst, but from the economic point of view, I think it's fair to say that Israel today has rebounded from the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if I recall you, the situation that we were all in globally just a year and a half ago, in March 2020, we were talking about the world's worst recession since the Great Depression. In Israel, we were fearing a biggest decline in GDP for at least 4 decades, with fear of high unemployment crisis, very severe fears and expectations. And let's see where we are a year and a half later. So this was the pre-COVID growth forecast of the Israeli economy. The forecast was that the Israeli economy will grow at a pace of about 3% per year. This is what we saw in the beginning of the first wave of the COVID crisis. We see a sharp decline in GDP and expected a very slow recovery. As economists, we call this a Nike shape recovery because the shape the slope is relatively modest. And at that time, we were only talking about one COVID-19 wave, and then we found out there is a second wave, which gave another downfall for the economy, and we were talking about a W-shape recovery. You can see the blue W here, with even slower GDP growth forecast. And in reality, although we went to a third wave and even a fourth wave, the recovery is what we call a V-shaped recovery. And actually, the current forecast is that at the end of this quarter, we will return to the growth or to GDP level, not 2019 GDP, but even higher, but to the GDP that we expected to be by the end of 2021 before the crisis. And actually, the Israeli economy is going out from this crisis with many opportunities, also many challenges. We'll talk about some of them, but also a lot of opportunities. And actually, we see forward to 2022 and beyond, opportunity for growth and economic opportunity even higher than we expected before this crisis. So I can say that the fears of luckily did not materialize, at least from the economic point of view. Part of the picture is, of course, the employment. And although it is true that Israel unemployment rate today is higher than it was pre-COVID, you can see that overall unemployment rate in Israel is relatively low compared to other countries. And we as economists usually define an unemployment rate below 6% as full employment, which also affects, of course, our wages. And the rebound here was that in the midst of the crisis, we saw over 35% of the Israeli workforce unemployed and receiving benefits, paid benefits from the government. But the balance shifted last April, and today we see employment even higher than it was. We have about 4 million jobs today in the economy versus about 3.7 million before in 2019. So we actually have higher employment. And the concerning news for the private sector, for the employers, is that wages are higher, and we also so the increase in employment was accompanied by higher average wage in the market, and that really affects the business sector. We also saw some structural changes in the economy. Digitization is one of it. Okay, we see that now being able to participate in an online conference, which would be more hard to imagine 2 years ago. But we also see that in other sectors, for example, online sales, online food sales doubled in the last 4 years, with the pace accelerating through the crisis. So structural changes that could have happened and would have taken 3 or 4 years happened more instantly, and opened the market for digitization and globalization. We see housing prices continue to rise in Israel, and it creates really a concern for young families that are it's becoming more and more difficult for them to purchase their first house. And again, the housing crisis in Israel is also strongly related to the fact that the population is growing. We need more and more housing units, and from the supply side, which is highly concentrated by the government, is not keeping up with demand. We see private consumption accelerating, cheap interest rates, higher income, We see, for example, vehicle sales peaking this year. The first 9 months, the first 3 quarters of 2021, we already reached the amount of vehicles sold in Israel the entire year in 2019. We see also a hike in penetration of electric vehicles coming and entrance of. And again, in the electric vehicle market, we are still lagging behind most European countries, but we see this market accelerating and creating growth opportunities for the whole ecosystem, not only for car imports, which are coming also not only from traditional markets, but more and more from China and from the Chinese market, but also in terms of charging infrastructure and related services. Gasoline consumption returned to 2019 levels, of course, after a very sharp decline last year, which also affected Israeli refineries, like most refineries in the world were affected in 2020 by very low refinery margins. But we see that the market rebounding with oil prices hiking, demand catching up, and margins going up. I think probably the sector that is last to recover is the tourism and airline industry. And what you can see in this chart is the Israeli hotel occupancy rate. And although overall occupancy this summer almost is still below summer of 2019, but you can also see that the mix has changed, and we lost naturally the international tourists. The Israeli internal tourism compensated for most, but not all, of this gap. And we are in BDO Israel. We are also working very intensively with the Israeli airlines, El Al, in tackling with this crisis. And no doubt for the airline industry, this is still a very severe crisis. And even more for Israel, that as a small country is highly reliant on international traffic. We practically have no domestic market for for local flights, for domestic flights. So our airline industry is highly reliant on global. I think one of the strengths of the Israeli economy is Israel's high-tech sector. And again, the high-tech sector was not severely affected, or even not affected at all by this crisis. We saw continued growth of high-tech service exports. I think the high-tech sector represents one of Israel's core strengths industries, both the industrial high-tech and the high-tech services market. And this is fueled by the fact that Israel is leading in terms of R&D expenditure relative to its R&D. Israel has, for many years, the highest rate of R&D expenditure versus all OECD countries. And this really gives the strength for the high-tech sector. We see many multinational high-tech firms operating in Israel, having R&D centers in Israel, acquiring and purchasing Israeli high-tech companies. So I think that the high-tech sector is definitely a strength for the Israeli economy. And I think the Israeli stock exchange, here you can see the Tel Aviv 125 index, not very different from the S&P 500 global index, recovering from the shock of the first wave of the COVID, returning to very significant growth rates. And what we also see as a very significant trend in the Israeli market is an IPO boom in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, with IPOs in 2020, last year, despite the crisis, peaking again this year, more than doubling the amount of capital raised in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. You can see that the technology sector is very dominant and a very significant growth sector here, but the growth in the IPO accounts for all and amounts to all sectors in the economy. Another strength of Israel is its natural resources, and traditionally we were not blessed with natural resources, certainly not compared to UAE, but 14 years ago, 15 years ago, already 17 years ago, we discovered natural gas resources and developed a growing natural gas industry that at first served the local market, and this year also began significant, or last year even began significant exports to neighboring countries, to Egypt, to Jordan. And we also, what we have seen in the last year is entrance of strong global multinational companies to Israel's natural gas industry. Began with Chevron's merger with Noble, or purchase of Noble Energy, and today Chevron is Israel's major or largest offshore operator of the gas fields. Continuing with Mubadala Petroleum, purchasing a stake in the Tamar field. We were very happy to accompany and consult, assist with Mubadala's acquisition and financing of this acquisition, which I really hope will finalize in the coming days or weeks. And I think this is a further demonstration of the ability of cross-border cooperation between the UAE and Israel, and really a sector that for UAE is naturally a very strong and globally position, along with Israel's resources. And I think part of Israel's challenge in this area is to develop export markets. And I think the cooperation with Mubadala Petroleum from the one hand, and with Chevron on the other hand, and no doubt will help Israel continue to amplify and grow this market in the coming years. So I'd like to conclude looking forward, how we see the economy for next year and where we are heading. So first of all, the economic policy or the macroeconomic environment in Israel, similar to many OECD countries during the past years, was of what we call monetary expansion and fiscal expansion. Very low, near zero interest rates, which stimulate the economy, along with government expenditure expansion to help the economy recover from the COVID crisis. So we see interest rate almost 0.1 interest rate continuing throughout the year. Israel's credit rating stable and at all-time peak, was not affected by the crisis, the COVID crisis. Inflation rate forecasts in Israel are expected to be lower than OECD and global inflation. Of course, we do see inflation picking up this year, as in many countries of the world. This is part of the commodity crisis and the increase of wages and increase of shipping costs. But overall, the current expectations in Israel is of the inflation rate to be contained and not beyond the declared 2% target barrier for the inflation. So to conclude, the macroeconomic forecast for next year, for 2022, the expectation of the Bank of Israel is a growth of 5.5% in Israel's GDP, following a 7% increase this year. And as you can see, the decline in 2020 was only 2%, so we are considerably higher this 2019 position, with private consumption fueling up the GDP growth with high growth rates, unemployment rate declining. We are facing, of course, a challenge of increasing debt to GDP ratio, like most countries that increased government deficits to adapt with or to tackle the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis, but in a situation where we see GDP continues to increase and private consumption continuing to increase, tax payment is increasing. So I think this is relatively good news, even for the government's ability to contain this debt to GDP ratio, with inflation increasing, but still below the 2% target as we see that today. So overall, we are very optimistic for the Israeli economy looking forward. And I think in terms of multinational corporations and deals, we are facing a period that can provide a lot of upsides for all participants. So thank you.
Thank you, Chen. And I'll take it from here. My name is Anat Bernstein-Reich. I'm heading the Israel-India Investment Banking and Consulting in BDO Israel. I'm also serving as the Vice President of Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce. And in my next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about business opportunities in Israel. What else can we talk about? So I'll share my screen with your permission. And I'll start to talk about the sectors. Where would you find business opportunities? Now, in principle, everywhere. And if you come to our office in Tel Aviv, we will have a handful of opportunities to offer you. I have a good friend that once said that Israel is like a candy store of technologies. And you just come and pick and choose. Another friend called it an orphanage of technologies that are looking to be adopted and adapted to your country. And the sectors that I would say have a lot of opportunities. And of course, this is just a few of the sectors that I would like to highlight. Agri-tech, naturally. And I know that many Israeli companies are coming to UAE and vice versa. I hear a lot of companies from Dubai, from Abu Dhabi coming here and looking for agri-solutions. And Israel is one of the leaders in the world in agri-solutions, from companies that specialize in drip irrigation, and of course there are the traditional ones, Netafim and Nandan Jain, which was acquired by J Irrigation, the Indian company, going to the new drip irrigation called N-Drip, that is also a very interesting technology, going to Agri-IoT, to Tevel, to AgroScout, many new technologies developed here that are, in your eyes, business opportunity. Food tech is a growing market here, which is quite amazing to see what's happening here. We all know about meatless meat, Beyond Meat, and all those companies from the US. You have similar companies here. But very interestingly, you find here companies that are milkless milk, eggless eggs. If you're a vegetarian, then those business opportunities will serve double purpose, because those companies really are able to make milk, not from the cow. They're able to create wonderful sunny side up, not from the chicken. You have a company called Khargol, for example, that is doing protein out of grasshoppers, hoppers, and so on. So food tech became a really major sector here, and I welcome you to look at it. Water, naturally, we have scarcity of water, and it relates to the agri-tech that I spoke about. Many technologies that are with irrigation, but also water treatment. I'm sure you know that Israel has one of the highest water treatment percentage of its usage, and therefore a lot of companies like IDE, Tahal, etc., developed amazing zero liquid discharge solutions for water, whether it's for municipal, whether it's for industrial. Smart manufacturing, it's a new sector that grown in the past few years. Quite interesting. If you have a manufacturing, you would like to look at technologies in the smart manufacturing space in Israel. Some people call it IoT, some people call it Industry 4.0. The names are different, the concept is the same. IT and cyber, I don't think that I have to add much. Here in BDO Israel, we have a very strong cyber practice, which is catering to the entire world. And Israel became the hub of cyber. Just today in the news, sometimes the news is not so good about our cyber capabilities, but still, cyber, every kid from the military has its own startup and own idea, and wonderful companies grow here like Palo Alto and Checkpoint and the like. Defense and HLS, Homeland Security, are major sectors. Mobility grew to be an interesting sector. Chen spoke about companies that went public in the past few years. Just to mention the two, Chakratech, which is doing energy storage for mobility, and Finergy, that it is doing aluminum from air, again, for the electric vehicle. And although we don't have an auto component, an automotive industry in Israel, somehow the mobility sector is very prominent with solutions for electric vehicle, for autonomous cars, for radar like Mobileye and the like. So those solutions exist here and are very interesting to look at. Something that the COVID stressed to us is the medical and biotech. Since, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes, the university in Israel create a lot of patents. The biotech industry grows here. All of you would know about Teva or Taro that was acquired by Sun Pharmaceutical from India. But more than that, there are a few clusters of biotech and medical, and also medical device that have grown here and are good opportunities to either collaborate or invest. And of course, energy, my colleagues will cover it later. So how to invest in Israel? I mean, I showed you just the tip of the iceberg of opportunities and sectors, but how actually global companies invest in Israel. So you can easily partner with a local company. That's the easiest way to do, or invest in the local company. Global companies come here and some of them set their corporate venture capital or invest in venture capital or many other investment vehicles. I just kind of mapped to you where the centers of venture capital are in Israel. It's mainly Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and Jerusalem, but you still can find centers all over Israel. The venture capital in Israel is established industry, and every year I see new funds coming up. So you can, if you want to make financial or strategic investment, a venture capital in Israel is a good opportunity that will give you a very nice deal flow. Another opportunity to do business in Israel is set up an incubator. And when we're talking about an incubator, and maybe Erez after me will discuss about the Israel Innovation Authority, that this is an entity which is important for you to know because they are they have started the incubator program, but today there are tenders to set incubators with government matching funds. And this is a very good way first to get access to technologies, get access to government funding. Another option, of course, is to open your local R&D center. And just I'll give you a few. It's not a conclusive list or table, but those are the international companies that have set R&D centers in Israel. Not enough yet from Asia. And I don't think yet that we have, and please correct me if I'm wrong, not any company yet from UAE. So I'm happy to update this list. And this is the way to get into Israeli technologies, by having an R&D center that uses the brain, but also access to technologies. Many of those R&D centers are also the scouters of technologies in Israel. And you can ask each of the brand names that appears here that their R&D center in Israel is a pillar in their innovation globally. If we look at the Indians, which are close to my heart and also to many of you, you see Infosys that acquired the company here and is using this company as their R&D center, also as their scouter. You have Tata that invested into Tel Aviv University. There is Tech Mahindra that acquired the company and is now serving as the R&D and scouting. And I don't see that I added here, but also Sun Pharmaceutical here is here by acquiring Taro, and Wipro is also here by acquiring GiveOn. I'll update it for next session, I guess. Acquiring a local company is another option. And of course, we will be happy to help you. Another thing that I wanted to highlight to you is licensing technologies from the academia. And the concept of TTOs, technology transfer offices, exist in every university in Israel, whether it's YEDA in the Weizmann Institute that focuses on life sciences, but also on mathematics. And many of the patents and actually the medicines that you know, like multiple sclerosis and more, are from YEDA or the Weizmann Institute. Now, how does it work? There is a database that you can go online to those TTOs and search the technologies that you like. And then contact them and try to license this technology. And then you can do it yourself, in a sense that the research was done in the academia level, you can take the development and then commercialize it. And those TTOs are very active, and if you approach them, they'll be happy to help you find the technology that you like. Of course, those are technologies in early stage, but many of the biotech companies and many other companies in Israel, even in the solar space, started in those TTOs. So those are a very good source for technologies and business. Just to mention Ramot of Tel Aviv University, Isum of Hebrew University, BGU of Ben Gurion University in the south of Israel. They have a very interesting desert technologies because Ben Gurion University is in the desert in the south of Israel. It can be relevant to UAE as well. And T3 of the Technion. Technion is Israel MIT, I would say, strong in IT and other technologies, engineering technologies. And of course, the best way to find business opportunities to come to us. And we would be happy to assist you via BDO UAE to approach Israeli companies. We have many opportunities in almost all the sectors that I mentioned, and we will be happy to share it with you. So thank you. This is my email if you'd like to approach me with more questions or queries or to elaborate on things that I said or share my presentation. So thank you, and I'm handing the mic to Erez.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Anat. Just gonna share my presentation, just a second.
Erez, just a sec. There is a question addressed to me from Niti Dalmia, and
Okay.
I'll reply to her. Niti was asking, can you tell about foreign company incorporating a company in Israel? So by coincidence, I'm also a lawyer, so it's an easy answer for me. It's very simple for a foreign company to incorporate a company in Israel. You can have 100% company in Israel. In most of the sectors, I would say very few, you're not allowed, but It's not an issue. You open a company within a day or two. Again, very simple. And also taking money out of Israel is also simple. So in that sense, the ease of doing business in Israel is one of the best in the world, and you're welcome to approach us and we'll be happy to assist you. Thank you. Erez, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So speaking about business opportunities again, so my part, I'm Erez Zaini, and I'm a partner in the tax cluster in Israel, and I'm also the head of the incentive department within the Israeli tax cluster. So I'm mainly dealing with taxation, which is important. And again, as Anat mentioned before, in Israel, we have a lot of tax incentives for the industrial and the ITEC sector. This is why, and then Anat mentioned also grants. I'm going to speak about it as well. So again, this is why one of the reasons we see the ITEC industry huge in Israel and always all the time expanding and again, and you find also opportunities like it was mentioned. So how does the Israeli legislator actually promote ITEC and industry? So we have a lot of tax incentive. Those incentives are let's say, mostly concentrated within the encouragement of capital investment law. We have one law in which you can find a couple of routes. The first and basic route for tax incentive is what we call a PE status, which is preferred enterprise status.
Erez, can you shift to a full screen? People will be able to see it better.
Now it's better?
Now press the full screen. Somehow
I actually pressed. It's not better?
No, never mind.
So status is actually really like more than 10 years tax regime. It was enacted in 2011. And I'm going to speak about the requirements in the next slides. But eventually, if I'm taking all the requirements, we have two basic, very simple requirements, conditions for the eligibility. The first one is to be industrial, although it's really complex to define what industrial is. But then again, most of, let's say, the manufacturing plants and also the entire ITEC sector, which is software mainly. You can go to cyber, wherever you go with the software. So this is actually within the definition of industrial activity. And also industrial activity can also be conducted through Israeli subcontractors. It's not like you need to have everything in your plant. You can also use subcontractors in Israel, sometimes also outside of Israel, but then again, only a small portion of that. So if you are industrial and you have a 25% export, your entire taxable income, business taxable income, not capital gains, only business taxable income is actually eligible for the tax incentives. What do we get? Again, in general, and I'm going to speak about it in the next slide. What do we get? We get 16% of corporate income tax in all Israel, unless it's zone area A, which is 7.5%. So again, Chen showed you the map of Israel. I think it was his first slide. Israel is a relatively small country. So driving 60 kilometers from Tel Aviv, it's zone A. You can find it, in Kiryat Gat or Yokneam. I'm pretty much sure that you're not familiar with the cities, but then again, it's really close to the center of Israel. So if you go to zone area A, it goes down to 7.5%, which this is a corporate income tax, which not really can compete with Cyprus, Ireland, Eastern Europe, or any other country which actually promotes ITEC through tax incentives. And also the dividends go down to 20%. And again, if foreigners are actually investing in Israel, usually we have a lot of tax treaties. So usually the dividend rate is also reduced by applicable tax treaty. And usually it goes between 5% to 15%. You can find, by the way, you can find treaties, treaties that it even goes to 0%. Let's say Germany or Austria or a couple of other countries which we have tax treaties in place. So again, what's the conditions for the PE eligibility? So the company should be registered in Israel and the business of which is controlled and managed in Israel. So it should be Israeli company, pretty simple. It can also be a partnership which all the partners are Israeli companies. Again, registering a company in Israel, it's pretty easy, like Anat mentioned before. But then again, even if you invest in an Israeli company, usually software company, then again, it's an Israeli company, and this company can provide you details or tax rulings, which actually tells you that under the law, they are entitled for those benefits that I mentioned before. By the way, in Israel, foreign investors are fully exempt of tax when they sell the shares. So if, let's say, a foreigner invests in an Israeli company, even without a treaty, you don't need a treaty, under Section 97B3, is exempt from tax. So it will be subject to tax. The company itself should be subject to tax, and also dividends will be subject to tax. But upon liquidity or exit or M&A, all the foreigners whatsoever, if they don't have a permanent establishment in Israel, then they are fully exempt. So you can see huge, by the way, you can see huge transaction like the Tnuva transaction, billions of dollars transactions in Israel, which are fully exempt from tax because, again, since 2009, there's a full exemption on foreigners having capital gains by selling shares of Israeli companies. So there's an exception for foreigners, and the company itself, if it is registered in Israel, then this is the first condition. The second condition is only compliance. Again, this is what I told you. It's only compliance. You should be, the company must maintain admissible books and records and file any reports required under the Israeli law on time, by the way. This is what the law requires. There shouldn't be any shareholders holding more than 25% or officer that were convicted in tax frauds. Again, really, really rare. So again, this is like a really simple requirement. Just comply with the law. You ask for incentive, comply with the law, makes sense. Again, like I mentioned, the company has an industrial plant, which we spoke about it. Again, the term is wide and also contains all the ITEC industry, biotechnology, nanotechnology, software, whatever. And competitive and contributes to the gross local production. Again, this is like a nice name to 25% export. Again, there's also a condition. Also, if you are not exporting 25%, if you are biotechnology or nanotechnology or renewable energy industry, then even if you are not actually exporting, you can get the tax incentives, unless you sell electricity. So if you are, so eventually, from my experience, didn't see any biotechnology or nanotechnology or renewable energy company which is not exporting. So again, like 99.99% of the companies are actually going through the 25% export. I'm really not familiar with anyone that asks for, for the alternative route of biotechnology, because anyway, usually they exporting at 25%. So if the PE status applies, then only income from the industrial activity in Israel will be considered to be preferred income. So you take the entire taxable income, which is linked to the industrial activity. It can be also interest or everything which is linked to the ongoing business. And then again, you can get also, by the way, the software's royalties from patents, whatever. So only income from industrial activity in Israel will be considered preferable income and will be subject to the lower corporate income tax. What do we get? So we spoke about zone area A and other the other parts of Israel. So zone area A, it goes down to 7.5%. And then again, I speak it in another slide. In zone area A, you get another bonus. You can get grants. So if you are actually investing in equipment, machinery and equipment, you can also apply to the investment center and ask for 20% grant. So you get both tax incentives and upon the initialization phase, when you actually invest in machinery and equipment, if it's not ITEC or just computers, which the investment is low, sometimes it's also rental improvements or even the building itself. You can get 20% grants, but this is only zone area A, which is 7.5%. If you go to the other parts of Israel, then you get only tax rate, only tax benefits of 16%. That I mentioned before. Again, dividends go down to 20% or reduced under a reduced rate under a tax treaty. Again, in Israel, just mentioning that intra-corporate dividends between two Israeli companies is exempt from tax. So usually what we have like a profitable company with, let's say, a lower CAT of 7.5%, and then again, we want, let's say, to invest the funds, the profits, let's say, even in real estate. Usually what we have is we have an holding company, then we distribute the dividend to another Israeli company, creating another subsidiary, and then again, we invest the money. In that case, we don't need to pay any tax on dividend because it's between the Israeli companies. It didn't get out of the Israeli corporation bubble. So within the bubble, it's really not subject to tax. So there are opportunities to actually allocate funds, to allocate profits between a couple of activities by using Israeli holding company. The second route, and a very important route, is the ITEC sector route, which is preferred technological enterprise, which is mainly software and companies with patents or innovations that were approved by the chief scientist, by the IAA, the Israeli Innovation Authorities. We use the word also chief scientist. So if it's a software sector or something which is very innovative, you can create a preferred technology. You can actually be eligible for the PTE status, which again, you can get tax benefits which are really better than what I mentioned before. But the main issue with the PTE is that you can manufacture abroad. No one really checks where do you manufacture. So if the software, there's no issue about manufacturing. But then again, even software companies sometimes sell the software within something which is within a computer, within a special system, like fueling systems and stuff like that. So in a case that you are eligible for the PTE status, and this is very important, you create chips, you create the semiconductors, you can actually manufacture anyway, and you will still be eligible for the tax incentives. So, and by the way, we have it a lot. So you can find Israel R&D centers, and you can find not R&D centers, the IP is located in Israel, and then again, all the manufacturing, usually with international companies, conducted in China, wherever, and still you will be subject to the lower tax rate. So this is the most important issue. I'm going to speak about tax rate, but this is like, if you ask me, what's the main thing in the PTE is that you can manufacture everywhere in the world. The terms from the PTE eligibility is that 7%, the R&D expenses are at least 7% of the company's annual turnover. Again, it's really measured in a 3 years period. But then again, it's not really important for this, just for you to be familiar with. So it should be 7% R&D expenses within the books, and 20% out of the company's employees should be R&D employees, which their salary is booked in the R&D line within the trial balance or the financial statements. If those two criteria are met, and you have 25% export, you have a company with a PTE eligibility. There are a couple of other alternatives like approaching chief scientists and stuff, but then again, it's really rare and it's not common. I'm speaking about only about common. So if you meet the 7% R&D expenses, the 20% employees linked to R&D activity, and export 25%, you are a PTE. In the case like that, the tax rate, the corporate income tax rate goes down to 12%. Again, in zone area A, it's still 7.5%. Doesn't go lower than that. The change is with dividends. So we have the 12% change instead of 16. The tax rate on dividends, again, it's 20%. But then again, if it's a foreign investor and to foreign corporates, if the Israeli company is held 90% by foreigners, then the tax rate on dividends go down to 4%. So if a Israeli company is held by let's say Google, Facebook, whatever, then it's 4%. Pharmaceutical company, all the international companies, Intel, whatever, 4%. Only for the PTE. It doesn't really in the PE. The PE is only go treaty or 20%. Here we go 4% or the treaty. Again, like I told you, the production activity, you can do the production activity wherever you like. But then again, there are two anti-avoidance rules. First of all, if you actually have manufacturing, let's say that you have a patent for a vaccine and you manufacture the vaccine in Israel, the law indicates that the profit which is linked to the production, and you don't need really to measure it, it's like a cost plus 10. There's this rule of cost plus 10 mechanism. So if the direct expenses for manufacturing are $1 million, they will tell you that $100,000 are not coming from the IP, it comes from production, and the $100,000 will be entitled for the PE tax incentives, which is 16. Or if the production is outside of Israel, you pay a regular tax rate, but it's really small portion of cost plus 10. And also there's what we call nexus mechanism, which is really comply with what I'm pretty much sure that you're familiar with the OECD regulations, which means that if you are actually conducting R&D outside of Israel, then you might find yourself affecting badly. It's not really terminating the PTE, but then again, the tax rate might go up because a portion of it is not subject to the PTE tax regime. But then again, there are some rules about it, like if you conducting R&D abroad, but it's unrelated party, it's okay. And other really other conditions, which if you meet, it doesn't really affect you. It's really complex. But then again, we have like this is what we call nexus mechanism, which really try to measure R&D conducted outside of Israel. But then again, there's always 25% of the R&D can be conducted outside of Israel, whatever. So if you're doing 75% in Israel, 25% abroad, even without any condition or any other reliefs that there are in the nexus mechanism, anyway, it's 100% PTE. Only if you go beyond that, you should actually check the reliefs, whether they apply or not, in order not to be affected or having reduced tax rates or reduced incentives because of conducting R&D abroad.
Hi, Erez.
Yeah.
There's a question for you. I'm not sure if you saw it, but
no, I can't see it. It's full screen, so please.
Okay, so I'll just read out the question for you. What is the minimum paid up capital for foreign direct investment in Israel? That's the first question.
None. Even if you invest $50,000 with a company, let's say in a seed phase, again, you get the shares. If you sell it, you're exempt. If the company becomes successful, she's entitled for the PE or the PTE tax regime. There's no minimum.
Thank you very much, Erez. And I guess we're circulating all these slides anyway to all the participants,
of course,
so they can see them.
Yeah, sure.
The slides aren't moving, so we might need to see if we can.
What do you mean? You don't see the slides right now? It moves, right?
The slide is up. The third slide is up at the moment.
Okay, so let me stop share and then share it again. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Thanks,
right
Erev.
now, you see the PTE slide right now?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Thank you.
So again, with the PTE, we have like something, again, this is like a special route within the PTE. It's the same conditions, but if you are actually held by international companies, which their turnover is 10 billion shekels, which is around 3.1, 3.2 billion dollars, then you get like a huge tax incentives. Again, not your turnover, the companies, the Israeli companies turnover, it's the companies, the international company turnover. So again, Google, Facebook, Pfizer, all the pharmaceuticals, if they buy a company in Israel, they purchase the company in Israel, and it's consolidated within the financial statement. So they buy actually control. In a case like that, they automatically go to the international companies route, which allows them to get 6% corporate income tax nationwide. Wherever you are, you can be in Tel Aviv, you can be in Jerusalem, you can be in Herzliya, you can be in Kfar Saba, wherever you want. You don't need to go to zone area A. It's not 12%, it's not 7.5%, it's 6% nationwide. And again, if it's international, because we don't have a lot of companies in Israel with 10 billion NIS, so we don't see it really, so it's usually international companies. And again, usually it will be a foreign corporate, again, with the 4% taxation on dividend, if at least 90% of the holdings in the company are held by foreign corporates. So again, Google will pay, let's say Google actually they buy, let's say Waze. So Waze creating income, pay 6%, distributing by 4%, less than around between 9 to 10. So it's really, really, really huge incentives. Even if you compare it, I don't know, to, again, I'm not familiar with the countries which give those kind of incentives, deep incentives like this route. Again, the same nexus mechanism and the production activity that I mentioned before with the cost plus applies also for the international companies route. Moving to the next slide. Also in Israel, we have for the ITEC sector, we can actually, Israeli companies can deduct its full R&D expenses. You know, the default is that they actually spread it into 3 years. But in Israel, if you apply to the chief scientist, you can actually deduct the R&D expenses on a cash basis, which is considered to be an incentive. And also in Israel, what we have under the PE, although it's a service company, it's not industrial company, there's a special exemption in the law that actually allows R&D centers. Although let's say that Intel Israel, which renders R&D services to Intel US, the IP sits in the US or in Ireland, wherever. So it's really like a service company, cost plus or stuff like that. So usually if it's an R&D service company, then we can also apply to the chief scientist easy. Usually you can get the approval for 3 to 4 years in one shot, in one application. So in a case like that, you get the approval for 3 to 4 years. And then again, you can also be eligible for the PE tax regime that I mentioned before, which is 16% and 7.5% in zone area A. I know that I'm really, so I'm gonna speedy it a little bit. So we have the, like Anat mentioned, we have the Israeli Innovation Authority, which is the chief scientist that I mentioned before. So again, tax benefits can only, someone can benefit from tax benefits only if he makes money, makes profit. Before he makes profit, he needs grants. And this is what I told you, with zone area A, you can get grants from the investment center of 20%. But what about R&D expenses, which are huge on the seed phase? So the chief scientist really has like, he has a lot of routes, like incubators, like Anat mentioned. and we have like really like, it's not only incubators, it's like having funds, like funds supported by chief scientists, like ITEC funds. Instead of being like fully private, you can also be partially private, having the chief scientists supporting the companies that you invest in, which is pretty. I'm not familiar with any country that do that, so it's really decreased the risk for the investors in the fund. So it's really something that people are really. It's very popular and people are doing that a lot. But then again, if I'm putting this aside, we have like three main routes, which is the ITEC round, the startups, which only young companies under the age of 5, and also traditional industry track, which actually the chief scientist told himself, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, he told himself, listen, we have the traditional company having so many employees, but then again, they're really stuck behind. Let's promote them to do R&D in order to improve the machineries, or also new products and stuff like that. So the traditional track, you get like 50% grant out of the R&D without paying any royalties. And by the way, all the OCS really tells you can get the grants, but then again, if you succeed, and only if you succeed and sell, then you need to pay royalties until you pay the full amount that you got. It's not royalties forever. So usually it's 3%. So if you got $1 million of grant, you will pay 3% only from sale until you pay the $1 million. If the company is not successful or the R&D actually terminated or became obsolete, then you don't need to pay anything. You need to make some sort of commitment to production in Israel, but it shouldn't be fully. So you can actually try to tell, listen, 50% will be in Israel, 50% outside of Israel. But the main criteria is that the IP should be in Israel. Can't get grants if the IP is not in Israel. And if you want to expatriate the IP, you might find yourself pay fines that can go up to three times more or 6 times more than what you got from the chief scientist. But then again, when you start a company and you need to have the first $2 million in order to find yourself with a commercial, with an MVP, minimum viable product that you can sell, it's really important money. And the most important thing is the OCS money is non-diluted money. So it's really easy. So it's easier to get grant from chief scientists than actually to approach a lot of investors. And also it's undiluted, especially on the seed phase, that when the valuation is very low, it's really important money for keeping the founders with high stakes in the company. Again, I'm just explaining. I'm going to pass the slides. I'm explaining again what there are thresholds and stuff like that. But then again, what's important to me to say is that when you file documents of the application, it's not really complex. You have the technological part, the market part that you need to describe. But the most important issue is that the budget of the chief scientist is really, really wide. You can get salaries, you can get overheads, materials, subcontractors, equipment, various, which is patents, software release, marketing. It really provides you with a very wide range of expenses covered by the budget. There are thresholds for the wages. Again, it's like approximately 35,000 shekels. By the way, it's employment cost. It's not like the salary of the employee. It's the full employment cost. But then again, in Israel right now, since we don't have a lot, we have a really shortage of R&D guys. So the salaries right now is higher than around $10,000 to $12,000. So we have threshold for the employees. Other than that, we don't have any threshold. The investment authority, this is what I mentioned. They have a couple of tracks. The most important track is the left one, the grant tracks, which actually allows you to get 20% grant. If you ask for 25%, you can get 20% grant on investment on machinery and equipment. There aren't any royalty. This is a full grant, pure grant, and only applies to companies in development area A. We have also other routes, but they are really not as common as the first one. So having saying all that, I hope you actually captured, you know, the picture. This is the what I meant to actually to bring to you. So we have a lot of incentives just to understand that the environment is really promotive when it comes to from the taxation side. So thank you very much. If you have questions, I will be happy to answer. If not, I'm going to pass it to Moti Dettelkramer, which is the head of the economic department cluster in BDO Israel. Okay, Moti, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I will speak today about the renewable energy market in Israel.
Israel. Sorry.
We will speak about the main opportunities, the market itself, and so on. Just a second, I want to put it on a full slide. Basically, the Israeli market, renewable energy, is compromised by 160 companies. The growth rate is 3.6% of green energy annual growth rate of those electricity consumption in the Israeli market. In the renewable market, it's 6%. So basically, the renewable market is growing 2 times almost from the regular electricity consumption, but we are seeing a huge growth in this market and the electricity market. Today, we are speaking about 2.5 gigawatt of installed capacity, which 87% is PV actually. Under construction, we are speaking about 3,500 megawatts. And the target of the Israeli government is about 30% by 2030. And the new resolution or the new statement, it's not resolution yet, of the Prime Minister is that until 2050, we will be in Israel on zero emission. So we have a huge opportunity regarding the...
Moti, you need to refresh because people don't see your slides. Yep, no. Move to...
Now it's fine.
Yeah, but move to a full screen because we see...
I am at full screen, not my...
So you'll have to refresh.
Yeah, just a second. I will do refresh. Now it's fine?
No. Yeah, now we'll live with that. It's not full, but that's okay.
I'll do that. Just a second. Now it's fine?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move forward. Basically, he spoke about the statement of the Prime Minister. We're speaking about zero emission by 2050, which of course will affect the renewable energy market and will stop product electricity from natural gas and coal, and this will lead to increase in the wind, in the PV market, and so on. So the 30% is in the next decade, but we are speaking about even a larger increase in the 20-30 years. Here we can see in the last year, we are seeing in the Israeli stock exchange, and in a minute I will show the companies, but basically we can see that the Tel Aviv 125, which is the leading stock market index, versus the renewable energy index, and we can see a huge yield gaps between the Tel Aviv 125, which is also has done very good in the last year. But we can see that this versus the Israeli renewable energy market, we are seeing the gaps, and we are seeing we are seeing that the renewable energy index is doing better than the Tel Aviv 125. And we are seeing that for the last 3 years. Of course, here we have the COVID-19 gap and the COVID-19 decrease in the market, but we are seeing that the market overwhelming increasing after the COVID-19 beginning, even though we are still in the COVID-19 period, we can see that the market is done with this crisis currently. If we are looking on selected companies, this is only a few companies, the largest companies in the market, but we have much more companies. As I mentioned, we have 160 renewable energy companies, and the market is growing every day. But we can see the market cap of the largest one, Nofar Energy, which is 3.1 billion shekels. Everything is in shekel. 7.4 in Enlight. Energix is 7.2. Energix and Enlight are doing a lot of renewable outside of Israel. They are doing projects in Poland, in the United States, in Spain, in Greece. Doral and Nofar are Israeli-based companies that currently are going out of Israel. They are going to the United States and Europe as well. Shikun Ubinui Energy, which is not traded yet, but they filed a prospectus in the last few months. They have the largest operational installed power by megawatt. Under construction, you can see the numbers. It's all around the world. It's not just in Israel, but you can see just 5 companies. They have more than 7,000 megawatt. So we can speak about large and domination companies in the Israeli market and outside of Israel, because as I mentioned, in Israel, we have currently 3,500 megawatts, and those companies, only those 5 are building outside of Israel more than 3,500 megawatt. So basically, we can see the large domination of the Israeli companies, which is because of course, the Israeli innovation, the Israeli test case that were in the Israeli Negev of PV, and the Israeli innovation regarding the wind project, because Enlight and Energix were in the wind market before of other European companies. If I'm looking on the sources of renewable energy, of course, the main source in the Israeli market and in Israel is the sun, of course, is the PV. We also have a small proportion of wind. All those 3 are actually part of the PV market. In a minute, I will show you the Israeli sun hours versus the sun hours in Europe, which is, of course, much higher. And of course, in the UAE is the same. So we can think about how we can collaborate regarding the PV market, and of course, to invest in the Israeli PV companies in order to think how to increase the yield of the PV and how to test other sites across the Middle East and the UAE especially. If I'm looking, of course, on the sunlight, we have advantage, and this is why the PV market and the PV companies in Israel went outside, and they have a lot of innovation as well, because it was the first, Israeli is the first in Europe sunlight hours. If we are looking about the capacity factor and then the number that we can use, number of hours we can use. So Israel is the first. Of course, afterwards is Cyprus, Portugal, Greece, and Spain, Romania, Bulgaria, and Italy. In all those countries, the Israeli companies are working, and so you can invest and think how to collaborate in Israeli companies that went to Europe in a PV or wind projects. So this is actually the numbers and in the European market. By the way, we can see This year, we can see investment from Israel in Denmark, in the UK as well. So not just PV, but wind and biomass and other renewable sources. So if we are looking on the renewable energy production and the PV tariff, we can see during the years, the market started in 2008 because before of all the renewable energy revolution and before of all the high profile of the global warming that became in the last few years, Israel started in 2008 or 2007 to start to regulate the market. And at the beginning, the price was very high because the price of the panels and the price of PV construction was very high as well. So the price of kilowatt per hour was 2 shekels. And it went down during the years, in the last 12 years, from 2 shekels to 15 agorot, which is 0.15 shekels, which is decrease of more than 90%. And it's across the world, this issue. Only in Europe, we are seeing now an increase back because of the energy crisis in Europe, and we see that the tariff, the future tariff of PV and wind and other renewable energy is going up. It's not the regulated tariff, it's the merchant tariff. We are splitting the tariff for merchants and the PPAs, of course. And we are seeing during the last year, because of the COVID and all the supply chain problems, we are seeing an increase in the wind and the PV and the renewable energy merchant prices. This increase will affect heavily on the profit of the Israeli companies because they are there in those markets. So if someone wants to enjoy from this tariff and in this tariff increase in the next 2 years, you can invest in some of the Israeli companies that also have already built projects in the European markets. So basically, the opportunity now is to invest in the Israeli innovated renewable energy market with some more than 150 companies with exposure to the European energy market. And that's it. I think that if someone has some questions regarding the market, I'm here.
I guess that no one has question, and we can move to the next speaker.
Yeah, the next speaker is Omri, which is in the Israeli consulting, BDO Consulting. He is the head of the project finance department. Omri, take the lead.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. Just a minute. Hopefully, people can see the screen. So, good morning. Again, my name is Omri Alevi. I head the project finance team within BDO Israel. In the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, I'll have a look at financing and risk mitigation available for project financings in the infrastructure and energy space in Israel. Just as a reminder, when we say project finance, which is long-term financing, on a global level, number of deals closed full year 2020, we can see that still oil and gas enjoy a very large share, and then renewables are very quickly picking up. If we go back, say, 10 years, the picture would have been much different. Of course, renewable energy would have been below 10%, well below 10%. There is still a lot of power being financed. And now in Israel, to give us all an idea of the volume of project financings, for year 2022, it is expected that $6 billion of projects will close. This is fairly similar to 2021. And we have light rail trains, solar, highway roads, fast lanes, and naturally oil and gas as well. When we talk about infrastructure and energy projects, so what we have in Israel, we will have conventional gas turbines, IPPs. They're still in the market for financing or are privatized or constructed. We have, of course, numerous renewable energy projects, mainly solar and wind, but some three pump storage projects in Israel. We have six distributors of natural gas across the nation. And we have seawater desalination, which is a very big, it's a big activity in Israel. Israel is actually an innovator in this space. We have seawater desalination as well. Oil and gas, we have three main reservoirs in Israel operating. We have Tamar and the Leviathan. Leviathan is 650 BCM. Tamar is 300, and we have 100 BCM for Energean's Crocodile or Karish Tanin, which is supposedly will come into the market or start flowing gas first quarter of 2022. Just as a quick note, it's a bit different than the financing. It's a bit different than for other infrastructure projects. So it's normally reserve-based lending for these projects. We have, as I mentioned, transportation projects that are still constructed as we speak, that are tendered as we speak. We have two very large new deepwater ports, both Ashdod, which is central south district, and Haifa, which is in the north. Each of them roughly or approximately 2 million TEU. One is being constructed, the other one in Haifa is being tendered as we speak. Now I'll talk a bit about, just a minute. Oh, I think it's better now. I'll talk a bit what the standard timeline for Israeli PPP projects look like. PPP projects, just so we're all on the same page, these are projects that are tendered by government authority or public authority. So it has a strict timeline to follow with a very, very detailed bidding process. So the way a tendered project would look like, you have the bid phase, and then on the bottom you can see the project or risk to an investor pertaining to the specific stage. So we have on the bid submission stage, normally in Israel would last 10 or 12 months. There will be a PQ, pre-qualification process, and then the RFQ or the invitation to bid will be published. You get 12 months to submit your commercial binding bid. Normally in Israel, you need to include within your bid committed or not fully committed, but strong letters of support from funders. Then the public entity will take about 4 to 6 months to evaluate, and they will declare the successful bidder. And then the project agreement will allow for normally for about up to 12 months to reach financial close. I will talk, and of course there would be bid bonds and to include within your bid submission, normally about 10, 15, 20 million shekels. Just a second. I'm hoping you can see my slides being refreshed. There's no feedback, so okay. Okay, how does the Israeli or standard funding look in Israel for the PPP projects, for the big infrastructure projects? So we have, firstly, the traditional funding structure is sort of consists of a construction loan or short-term loan, which it would be taken out or replaced or refinanced by a term loan for up to 23, 24 years. This is normal. Very, very common to find in Israel. The funders in the past maybe 4 to 5 years would happily offer equity bridge funding. So this would bridge your equity contribution into the project. So equity would only come in post construction. So the first funds being utilized to a project is the equity bridge funding. And then normally, or in very large infrastructure projects, you would have government investment grants available. So again, you will have, but the government investment grant is paid towards the end of construction in installments. So you will have grant bridge funding or bridging facilities. And then you would deploy the senior debt short-term facility. At the end of construction, or what we call in Israel the determining date, which would be a permit to operate, up to permit to operate plus 2 years, again, we will replace or repay the construction loan with the term loan, with long-term facility. There is an adjustment. Or a calculation being done versus the public sector. I will speak about that in a minute, which is part of the way the government hedges interest rate fluctuations, protecting the concessionaire. So this is being done at the end of construction. Standard funding structure, again, we will have construction loans that normally 80-20 gearing. As I mentioned here, that strong projects, this would be PFIs with availability payments or energy projects with a feed-in tariff that we still have in Israel on some less common basis, but there are still feed-in tariffs. This would go up to 85-15 during construction, and of course, post-construction. Pricing, of course, this varies, but I think pricing in Israel is competitive. It may not be as competitive as on some European level PFIs. We can probably, I think normal margins would be, say, 220 basis points over LIBOR or over LIBOR swaps. We have the two leading credit rating agencies, both S&P and Moody's. They are active in Israel through a branch and a subsidiary. The funders in Israel, the Israeli market is traditionally dominated by 2 or 3 big banks, or the two biggest banks, which are Hapoalim and Leumi. And then we have Discount and Mizrahi, which form sort of the next level of big funders. So the market would be dominated. All other small banks and then all institutional investors, which is a big community in Israel, They participate mainly in the syndicates. In the last 5-7 years, some of the large insurance groups are able to actually put together or arrange medium-sized tickets, medium-sized financings. Global banks, we'll have a slide about that, have become active recently, beginning with the oil and gas sector, which were led by them. But then again, the global lenders are moving into the other infrastructure projects, either cooperating with the Israeli arranger at some level. You can see a slide here that I put together on just to give you an idea of which global funders are active in Israel. This is actually important because if an international group or global group invests or participates in a PPP or in an infrastructure project in Israel, so it's important to see firstly who is already active, and secondly, and I note it here, some of them, especially HSBC, but not only, they actually look at the project on a follow your customer basis, meaning if you have a good client relationship with HSBC in London or in anywhere or in Dubai or in any other place in the world, they will support your bid in Israel. This is the way they look at this. But again, you can see that other giants are active. KfW is very active in Israel. So I think the participation of international funders in Israel is picking up and will still increase. Risk allocation and mitigation. I think this is an important element, which, to the best of my knowledge, is not what is commonly accepted internationally. Meaning, I think Israel offers an advantage risk-wise, financial risk-wise, when comparing to European projects. So to give you an idea, so there is the government grant, which may be also in place in other places of the world, but there is normally is a large chunk of government investment grant available to infrastructure projects, paid in installments during construction. Also, moving on to more financial risk, you will have currency protection. So this means that the contractor or the concessionaire can actually, whether you bid for a tariff or if you bid for annual payments, availability payments for when constructing and operating a highway, you can ask the government during the bid stage when you put in your bid to pay you the periodic payment in various currencies. That is fine. The government also offers you a basket of indices to choose from. So you can ask again the government already within your bid, to link the payment that you are to be paid during the operation phase to a large sort of indices, from labor indices to local CPI, to European HICP, to USA HICP, electricity index, a variety. And maybe more importantly for us financiers, or in my community, is the interest rate protection. Anybody who has made an investment in international project or even in his own country knows that from the time that you put in your bid to the time that you actually are awarded with a project and actually reach financial close and start funding it, you are actually exposed to movement in the base interest rates. So if interest rates now are at an all-time low, well below zero, most places, no reason why they could not go 1% or 2% higher in the next 2 years. So again, Israeli projects offer a protection for this. almost free of charge, so to speak, but it's within the bid process. On termination of projects, there is a protection, of course, if the government, if the public entity terminates the agreement for any reason, you will get full compensation for your equity investment and senior debt. Even in force majeure situations, the project will get, of course, an extension of timelines, etc. But also the senior debt funders are protected, which allows them to be more competitive or more, it allows the project to be more attractive. Even if there is a breach of concessionaire, even if the concessionaire breaches the agreement, still on some or a lot of occasions, the senior debt will be repaid by the government. This is a bit more detailed. This is a bit more detailed, but it shows you, provides you a picture of all the main risks which are relevant to projects. So you can see, of course, that the construction risk lies with the project company. Normally, there is no demand or revenue risk in projects in Israel, fairly like any other places in the world nowadays. Demand or revenue will be with the owner, with the government, and the concessionaire will receive availability-based payments. O&M risks, just as with the construction risk, lies with the project company, which of course will pass it down to his contractors. Foreign currency risk, I said the government protects those currencies, so it's with the owner. Site risk, probably the risk will be shared with the owner, depending on project specifics. And this pertains to the availability of the site. Permits, the project company will need to look after all the permits relevant, the building permits, etc. And as mentioned before, indexation and interest rate risk is with the government, which is very convenient. That is it. If there is any question, I'll gladly try to answer. Okay, if there aren't any questions, I'll probably, being the last speaker, I'll say thank you all for joining and for listening in. And of course, I think myself and everybody else would be available via email or any other means which was offered to take any specific questions or follow-ups. So thanks a lot.